So there's these ways in which there's common places in the body where we tend to grip or hold tension. So what we can do is actually work directly with those somatic looping symptoms with a somatic interweave. And so some examples might be, if there was a sound to that feeling in your throat, what sound does it want to make? If there were words to that heaviness in your chest, what might it say? If you could allow your arms to take over the feeling that you're having, or the emotion that you're having, or if the client is really wordy and they're telling a story, just let your body tell the story without words. So we have different techniques to actually let the body start to move the energy that's getting stuck.
In this video, I'm talking again with Dr. Arielle Schwartz. Arielle is the author of 5 books. And in this interview, we continue talking about her 2021 book, The Complex PTSD Treatment Manual. Arielle talks about the limitations of top-down therapies. She gives examples of bottom-up protocols and where you can find them. She also shares a lot of good information on the topic of somatic resourcing. We will talk about dual awareness in somatic psychology, EMDR, and parts work, and a lot more. Here's the interview. Dr. Arielle Schwartz, welcome back to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me back. It's such a joy to talk with you.
Thank you. So we continue to talk about the complex PTSD treatment manual and integrative mind-body approach to trauma recovery. And I want to start with a quote that I really liked from the book. In the book, you write that without interventions that incorporate somatic awareness and movement, many therapeutic approaches are limited in their ability to help clients fully release the impact of traumatic events. Why is that? Why are we limited by talk therapy or any kind of therapy that doesn't use somatic awareness and movement?
Yeah. So if we think about one of the core definitions of trauma, we're really looking at the way that the body doesn't get to complete the kind of instinctual response that it's longing to complete. There's a thwarted instinct, and I'm borrowing from Peter Levine's somatic experiencing model here. So for example, if you're in an environment where you are trapped and you're not able to flee, right? That there is a way in which that flight energy, that desire to run from and escape from the threat is held. It's not completed. It doesn't get to move through. If you froze inside of a situation, if you couldn't protect yourself inside of a situation, if you couldn't in some way or another engage that instinctual response to push or to kick, right? And so all of those actions can get stuck, or maybe you collapsed, right? Maybe that instead of having your own sense of self, you took care of everybody else. So the ways in which we have these motoric responses that are meant to help protect us in the face of threat didn't get to fully sequence or complete. The body is actually, in a way, always attempting to find resolution. And our top-down approaches to therapy, our cognitive approaches, our thought-based approaches, our narrative approaches are limited because they're engaging the upper brain. And all of these instinctual responses are down here in the brainstem. We're really talking about how do we access the limbic and brainstem lower brain areas, and we need bottom-up strategies to get there.
Yeah, you talked about the freeze response, which we have the fight or flight, and then we have freeze. I'm thinking about I used to work with refugees for 4 years who had that freeze response. A lot of times, a lot of my clients have been tortured, and that freeze response was also for an extended period of time. So it wasn't just a one-time thing. Like, let's say like a car accident and you're trapped there and you have all this body energy and you need to get out, but you're trapped. But this is a continuous response. Does that have more impact when an individual is stuck in a freeze response for an extended period of time?
Yes. And one of the things that I want to really kind of hone in on as a distinction is that a freeze response is actually only meant from a nervous system perspective. It actually is only meant to be a short-term management of high stress. And it's the sympathetic nervous system, which drives that freeze response, actually doesn't have the fuel to maintain it over long periods of time. And so what starts to take over is actually an evolutionarily older form of immobilization, which is driven by what we refer to as more of a faint response or a collapse, or the impact of chronic helplessness and powerlessness that you're describing, for example, that a refugee would experience with ongoing torture or ongoing experiences where they're not safe, right? Or fear of deportation, even if you're not directly being targeted, but you're afraid that you might have to leave your country. So those types of experiences have a tremendous toll on the nervous system and, if not resolved, on the health of an individual.
Yeah, and these are not just metaphors, right? We know that now we can measure, certain hormones in the body, stress hormones, right? That, like you said, are designed by evolution to be in our system for a very short period of time. But once they have been in our system for a longer period of time, they have pretty much devastating effects on both on our physical and mental well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm curious, Arielle, what are your thoughts about how can EMDR therapists do a better job incorporating somatic work into the EMDR work?
So, there are actually some really beautiful existing protocols within EMDR that do this beautifully. And of course, in EMDR and somatic psychology book that Barb Mayberger and I wrote together, we have a very comprehensive picture of all of this. But one of the things that I come back to again and again is the bottom-up protocols, right? All of those protocols that Ruth Lanius brings in and Sandra Paulson brings in and Ulrich Lanius they bring in this understanding that we need to pay attention to the sensory experience, the sensory components of our EMDR target. And that actually when we go too much into focusing on the cognitive components or even the image-based components, we might be missing the deeper layer of this. Especially, for example, if you're working with pre-verbal trauma or non-verbal trauma where we don't have clear, explicit memories, we need to go toward the felt sense. And every time we're checking in between sets, we really need to ask the client, what are you noticing now? And if they're telling you a thought, say, come back to your body. What are you feeling? What are you sensing?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that. I think that this is a really good approach to get into. A lot of times with a lot of the clients that we work with, there are implicit memories that we're working with that we can get through, like you said, through images and thoughts. And the implicit memories are more stored in the body. So I think that's a really good approach. In the book, you write, and I quote, when offering any intervention, we must let go of our expectations about the outcome. Why is that? Why is it important for us to let go of the outcome?
Yeah. So, we are going to kind of plant a seed, and then we want to see how it's going to grow. We want to allow if I'll borrow from Francine Shapiro here, the adaptive information processing system of the client to actually really come into play. We want to trust that the associations and the connections, even what we might sometimes typically think of as resistance, when we take this very open-hearted curiosity to what is true for the client, there is no wrong answer. There's no such thing as resistance. all we want to know is what's true. And I think what happens too often is that when we have an expected outcome for any intervention, then the client starts to feel like they either have to comply with the right answer or they're doing something wrong. They're not doing therapy correctly. And so if we come back again and again and remind the people we work with, there is no wrong answer. There's no right response to what we're exploring here together. It's all an opportunity just to get to know what's true for you. And so if you tell me, for example, that something that we're doing, that you don't like it, that it feels uncomfortable, that you don't want to do that, those are great pieces of information. It allows us to work collaboratively, and it reduces the power differential that can sometimes happen when we have this thing that we're doing that we expect to work in a certain way.
Yeah, so we don't prescribe interventions. We use interventions, and I agree with you, because a lot of times we see clients that feel like I'm not doing it right. Or even when, I encourage pretty much all of my clients to meditate, and they come back and they say, I feel like I'm not doing it right. That's kind of like reinforcing what they already believe about themselves. And I think that I agree with that. I fully agree with what you said, that if we take out the expectations and we're just being present with them moment to moment, then they can learn to trust themselves. I want to ask you about dual awareness. You write in the book that with body-centered approaches, we work with dual awareness, and you talk about this dual awareness of external senses and internal sense of the body. Is that a different kind of dual awareness that we talk about in EMDR, that, when we learn in our basic training that, one foot in the present, one foot in the past, dual awareness?
Okay. So first of all, I love this question, and it's such a passionate question for me, because I think of dual awareness, or sometimes we refer to it as dual attention state, in many different frames. Okay. So within somatic psychology, we actually also have the conversation about dual awareness, dual attention. Babette Rothschild speaks about it in her work in trauma in the body and so forth. And so what we're looking at is that sometimes interoceptive information, and you can listen to our previous interview to understand what that means, but basically the information we're getting from the internal sensations in our body, that's where we can get flooded, right? All of a sudden I feel this gripping, or my heart is beating so fast, or my breath is doing something and I feel like I can't breathe. It can be very flooding. So we can use external awareness, external orienting to present-centered cues of safety as a way to actually dampen down that interoceptive flooding. So it's a beautiful way to then build that capacity to have one foot oriented in the here and now while we touch into the memory of the past. The memory of the past is really just showing up through these interoceptive cues anyway. So in a way, it's interchangeable. But I want to say one more thing about dual awareness in the integrative model, because in parts work, we're also building dual awareness. Sometimes we call it co-consciousness. But what we're trying to do is maintain enough of the adult or present-centered here now self, wise self, capital S self, so that we can turn towards a part that's holding the emotions or the sensations or the memories of the trauma of the past or the attachment wounds or whatever that might be, without totally blending into the part. So we're still anchoring that one foot in the here and now and one foot touching into the past. They're all really the same concept, but slightly nuanced language.
Yeah. And would that be an example of a somatic resource? Or maybe you can talk a little bit about somatic resources that you talk a lot about in the book. What is the advantage of using somatic resource? And maybe you can give an example.
Sure, I'm happy to. So we have a wide array of somatic resources that we can build in, and I'll speak about this, building this into EMDR, for example, during your preparation phase, that can include very specific tools that can help anchor that here and now awareness, right? So it might be something as simple as a client who's sitting, in the room and feeling somewhat collapsed, and inviting them just to notice what it feels like to put their feet on the ground. And I often encourage taking off the shoes to really feel your feet, right? Free them from the shoes, right? And then pressing into the feet enough to engage through the large muscles of the legs, right? So that you can try this, and your listeners, you can try this too, right? So that if you push into your feet, you're going to increase some awareness of your quadriceps in particular, right? And you can even pull your feet slightly towards you. It'll wake up the backs of the legs. You can push your feet slightly away from you, unless you're on a rolly chair, and then you're going to roll away. But you know what I mean, right? Like, so you can really anchor that feeling. You can even do this standing up. Who says we have to do therapy sitting down, right? So we can stand up together and do this. And once we've got that anchoring down into the feet, which we refer to as grounding, then we actually have a much greater capacity to press into the sits bones and lengthen the spine. And sometimes something as simple as that postural shift of grounding through the legs and lengthening through the spine, and realizing I'm walking through the world like this, but what happens when I look at the world like this? I had used this in session with a client who loved it so much. And I suggested to her to notice what it was like as she was walking through the world like this or like this. And in Boulder, Colorado, we have Pearl Street Mall. It's our walking mall. It's like your 16th Street Mall in Denver, right? And so she, this is kind of pre-pandemic, no masks in this story. And I think masks are a very interesting topic when it comes to social engagement and all of this. But anyhow, pre-pandemic story, she was walking down the Pearl Street Mall, and she walked down one way on the mall in her kind of more habitual posture, looking down at her feet. And then she walked the other way down the mall with her head lifted. And she described the differences in her thoughts just as a result of that postural change.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. Like, I walked around, I felt isolated. Nobody asked me how I was. Nobody smiled at me. Well, she couldn't see if they were smiling at her, right? But that feeling of being so isolated inside of that experience, and to walk around and to make eye contact and see that people looked and smiled, or said, how are you? Right? Like, it was this totally different sense of herself.
Yeah. I wonder what would happen if she tried it in New York, if people would still say hello. I guess therapists in New York or some places in the East Coast have to take their location into consideration.
It's actually a really, really good point. If I can actually share a story about that. So I grew up on Long Island, and I spent a lot of time in Manhattan. But I was recently teaching a training in Manhattan about 2 years ago, again, pre-pandemic story. But I was teaching about another somatic release process, which was about just the benefit of shaking off, something that was really scary. And I was sharing a story that had happened here to me personally in Boulder, Colorado. I was in a car accident. My airbags went off. The other driver and I were standing outside of our cars afterwards, and I was trained in somatics, and I'm shaking, and whoa, that was intense. Woo. And he's standing there totally still. Right. And I'm doing this whole thing. And I was just like, man, just get it out of your body. Right. I'm like coaching this other driver, like, it's okay to release it. Right. But I shared this story, and there was a Black American woman therapist that was at the training. And she shared how, we really also want to keep in mind culture, because if a Black man gets out of his car and starts moving, he's a target. It's a threat, right? Like that experience of having to be still in order to not be a threat. And it's so important to keep all of those layers of context and culture in mind, especially when we're talking about these body-centered interventions.
Absolutely. That's a really good example. I wouldn't even thought about it. So thank you for mentioning it. Arielle, one more way that you mention in the book to how we can work somatically with our clients is somatic interweaves, which I find it really interesting because, interweaves originally, Francine Shapiro called them cognitive interweaves. What are somatic interweaves? And again, what is the advantage of using somatic interweaves as we try to help our client process EMDR targets?
Great. So, why do we bring an interweave in? It's because during phase 4 reprocessing, the client starts to feel stuck or they're looping in their process. And ideally, we have a healthy enough collaborative dynamic with our client where they can tell us when they're starting to feel stuck or when they're looping, right? So we have that. They could say, oh, stop. I need, I'm looping here. I feel stuck. I'm just repeating on this, or we sense it because they keep giving us the same answer set after set. Nothing's going to work. It's helpless. I don't see a way out, right? So a cognitive interweave is just enough of a planting of a seed, an inquiry, a question to get the process moving again. But when we're working in a bottom-up manner, when we're trying to get down into the low brain, a somatic interweave fulfills the same purpose, but we're going right towards working with the body. So, for example, if I've had so many clients myself and working with so many consultees who have shared stories about the client is processing and then it goes up into their throat and it's stuck. And set after set, it's just like there's this knot here. It's like there's this knot and I can't get rid of it, or it moves between my throat and my belly, or whatever that is. So when we have clients that are reporting these somatic sensations, right? They're processing and all of a sudden they start to get a headache, right? Or they're processing and their jaw gets really tight. So there's these ways in which there's common places in the body where we tend to grip or hold tension. So what we can do is actually work directly with those somatic looping symptoms with a somatic interweave. And so some examples might be, if there was a sound to that feeling in your throat, what sound does it want to make? If there were words to that heaviness in your chest, what might it say? If you could allow your arms to take over the feeling that you're having, or the emotion that you're having, or if the client is really wordy and they're telling a story, just let your body tell the story without words. So we have different techniques to actually let the body start to move the energy that's getting stuck.
Yeah, one of the techniques that you actually mentioned in the book is the satisfaction cycle. It's a technique that has 5 phases: yielding, pushing, reaching, grasping, and then pulling actions. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe we can do a little demo.
Great. That would be great. So a little bit about the history of the satisfaction cycle. So, and it'll tie into my background, how I came into somatic psychology myself. So I initially was introduced to somatic psychology when I was in undergraduate college, and I had been introduced to a body-centered approach called body-mind centering. We had a workshop at our college. It was really very different from anything that I had ever learned before. And it was kind of working again very much with the body. Fast forward a few years later, in 1996, I moved here to Boulder, Colorado, because I wanted to study somatic psychology. And in particular, there is a teacher here at Naropa University in Boulder named Susan Aposhin, who developed body-mind psychotherapy, or BMP. And body-mind psychotherapy is basically applying psychologically body-mind centering, which was developed by Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. A lot of history and a lot of names, and y'all can go look these up. But what I want to say about it is that the satisfaction cycle, which comes out of that tradition, is this understanding that that developmentally we go through these different phases naturally of developmental movements in the world that support our psychological growth and development. And the first of these is the ability to yield. So I'm going to guide you through this, and I'll teach it as I talk you through it. So yielding is a very important state in the body because it allows us to rest. Mm-hmm. And if you think about the original learning of yielding, it's the ability for an infant, for example, to yield into the safety of the womb or the safety of the loving arms of another. In the context of developmental trauma, yielding is compromised because there's a vigilance. So we want to ultimately reclaim that ability to feel safe in relationship to gravity. So, for example, a very simple yielding practice is to just let yourself be held by the chair, right? To not resist the support. You don't actually have to hold yourself up right now, right? To just allow yourself to feel that gravity's got you, that the back of the chair has your back, that you can allow the breath to be soft.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a very receptive state. And because it's receptive and because we're softening our vigilance, it can bring up whatever we're bracing against. So we want to move very gently towards yielding. It's like we want to titrate our way into that ability to embrace that softness. Okay. So, there's nothing rushed here. It's like, oh, wow, I just yielded 10% into my chair. I just let go of just a little bit of that holding in my jaw, or I let my eyes just really rest into my face, right? So those are all examples. I let my tongue be soft. Yeah. And it's subtle, but it's powerful. Once a child feels really safe and yielded, they start to push against the ground or against the other to develop a separateness of self, right? And likewise, we all need that push. A push is just as important as a yield. There's no part of this cycle that's more important than another. They're all valuable. So, going back to that grounding, if we're pushing into the feet and we're engaging the legs, and it allows us to find that push through the pelvic floor so we can have that lift of the spine. A push is a very important way of saying, this is me, that's you. I get to have a boundary. I can push through the lower body and I can push through my arms. And going back to those thwarted instincts, a push can really help me go, no, I don't want that, right? And we can re-engage the push through, doing a wall squat, right? Or we can engage the push by pushing with your arms and hands against a wall, or imagining that and you'll do this with me. Let's do this together. Yeah. I'll take you through it. Imagine, you might have to work with your mic there, but right, you got this big, all the stress, the pandemic, all the stuff, right? And it's like that big boulder of stress in front of you, and you're going to push it off of you and just really let yourself feel that strength of your push, right? Your arms might even shake, you're pushing so hard, right? And then let your arms go and just notice the impact in your nervous system.
Yeah.
And it's subtle but powerful, right?
Yeah.
What I like about it is that usually there's a little bit of an increase in sympathetic activation. You feel your heart rate increase a little bit and then settle back down. When we're building nervous system flexibility, we want to be able to tolerate little bits of stress and know that we can come back into resolution and recovery. So we do these movements slowly and mindfully to be able to ride that wave. So a well-established push allows us to progress through the satisfaction cycle. So with a well-established push, I can reach for what I want. I can reach for contact, right? I can reach through my eyes. I can reach through my heart, my curiosity. I can reach through my hands. I can, reach for something, my water, right? I can reach for something that I want. But when we think about reaching in relationship, if we don't have a well-established push and I reach into relationship, I fall into the other. But with a well-established yield that supports a push, I can reach, I can make relational contact, but not lose my sense of self. And so there is this really beautiful way that I can connect and still maintain me. I can have that boundary, but be in connection to you. And you can try that with me, right? Whether it's just an energetic reach or reaching with your hands, but there's that feeling of we can be connected and still have a self.
Yeah. I'm curious. I know we're not done with the phases yet, but I'm curious. We all had to work virtually for, an extended period of time. And if you were able to work with a satisfaction cycle while working virtually, how does that work?
Right. We're doing it. Right. I mean, what's been so beautiful is how much we can still feel that connection. And I've been blown away by how much my body is still in resonance, even over a screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really quite touching. And that experience, and there's been actually, I mean, I miss the in-person work, and I've gone back in person. So I now see, some people still by Zoom who prefer it. I see some people in person. It's been beautiful. The first time I went back in person, I cried. I was like, oh my gosh, I missed this so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that power of being able to feel the connectivity, and for some folks, and I bet you've seen this too, working over Zoom has felt safer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's actually been almost like the natural boundary.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's been really cool to go through this social experiment. It's also been challenging to go through this social experiment.
Right.
But, yeah. I want to finish the cycle because it gets pretty cool. So we have our yield, we have our push, we have our reach, we have our grasp and our pull, right? So I'll go with my water bottle, and you can find something if you see something you want to pick up. Good. You've got your tea, right? So you can grasp what it is that you want and you can bring it in, right? And that practice of, I see something I want in the world. I know that I have efficacy, self-efficacy to go after what I want, to reach for it, to grasp it, to bring it into myself. And to receive it. And to receive it requires that we yield. Yeah. To enjoy that tea, the taste of it, the flavor, it's receptivity. It's a surrendering of the vigilance, right?
Yeah.
It's satisfying. But here's where that last bit of the cycle can get tripped up. Is that for someone who struggles with yield, grasp and pull can become a never-ending cycle that never satisfies. I need more. I need more social media. I need more likes. I need more things. I need more food. I need more pot, whatever the thing is, right? I need more friends. I need more. And so, but the problem is I'm never pausing to receive it, right? Hoarding, addictions, and with great reverence for what is the underlying trauma that leads to those conditions, right? So that if we see that the earliest experience of it's safe to receive was compromised, then the whole cycle can be off. So we come back to learning how to yield. And Steve Porges and I have had many conversations together about how we progress towards the safety, right? He has a safe and sound protocol. We're working towards, yielding. And yoga, we've got yoga nidra or shavasana. We've got these resting practices, meditation. We're going towards stillness.
Yeah.
But we have to progress towards safety in immobilization at a pace that the client can tolerate.
Yeah. I just want to mention to our viewers that a lot of these yoga practices they can find on your YouTube channel, that you really do a really good job of just adding more and more vagus nerve yoga, and it's wonderful.
Thank you. You want to know something? It became my pandemic project.
Yeah.
I have taught locally for 20 years, and all of a sudden I started teaching on Zoom, and it became really a gift from the heart. They're all free out there, and they're donation based, and it's just really a gift to be able to offer those.
That's great. The Art and Science of EMDR is my pandemic project, so I guess there are some good things that came out of this pandemic. Arielle, I want to ask you one more question before we say goodbye. You call your work resilience-informed therapy. Can you talk a little bit about resilience, and what it means, and what does it look like in therapy? Yeah.
So when I first became a quote-unquote trauma therapist, it was in the late 1990s. I had recently graduated from Somatic psychology program. Somatic psychology has so many applications for trauma treatment. And then in 2000, I trained in EMDR. So it's now been 21 years that I've been using EMDR and somatic psychology in combination for trauma treatment. And initially, we get so focused on that trauma timeline and the case conceptualization in that trauma-informed lens. It's a good thing. But what can happen is that when all we're doing is shining the lens of awareness on the trauma, on the problems, on the challenges, that we as clinicians and our clients are much more likely to feel overwhelmed, to feel hopeless, to feel powerless. Oh my gosh, I'm really screwed up. My whole life has been a tragedy, right? And so what we do is we have to pendulate or oscillate our awareness and turn towards the strength-based approach, turns towards the existing resilience within the individual. How did you survive all of this? What helped you get there? Who was there for you? What are the strengths that you discovered inside of you after having had to go through these challenges? What are the gifts that you bring into the world, in the face of what you've had to, that you've learned about yourself and that you feel motivated to share because of what you've lived through? And so when we shift to this resilience lens or add that resilience lens to the trauma-informed picture, it is actually a very nourishing therapeutic package. Right. So that has really been my passion to teach these, and I bring it into the post-traumatic growth guidebook, and I bring it into the yoga and into the complex PTSD treatment manual, is this resilience informed approach, which is very well-rounded.
Dr. Arielle Schwartz, author of the complex PTSD treatment manual. Thank you so much for your time. That was wonderful. I think that the information you provided would be so helpful for many EMDR therapists. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me once again.